Allen Company and Big Al will be at the I-80 Truckers Jamboree. See you there.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
The Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance wants to put tracking devices on your truck. In fact, it's at the top of CVSA's priority list for the new highway bill. Scott Thompson discusses the details of their proposal and more with Mark Schirmer of Landline Magazine. Today begins the final week of Landline Now on the Air, a run that began 20 years and 1 month ago. One of our trademarks has been stories about those who served, and one of those that we're very proud of is the story of a Navy vessel that played a key role the day Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, fell, finally ending 30 years of conflict in that nation and causing thousands of refugees to flee the South for safer shores. It's the story of the USS Kirk as told through the eyes of a trucker who served as a gunner on the ship, a trucker who was in Saigon at the end, and the ship's official historian who was also on board that day. Also on today's program, as we reported Friday, the Secretary of Transportation has announced 9 individual actions that the FMCSA will take to make truckers' lives easier, and it sounds like an OOIDA wish list. From more truck parking and a better split sleeper berth provision, to an end to attempts to require speed limiters and a commitment to fix double brokering, and even more. I'll get a rundown from Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. And now, here's Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. The Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance is floating an idea that is sure to be met with some resistance among a big segment of the trucking population. In fact, it already has been. Mark Schirmer of Landline Magazine joins us to discuss the idea and the reception. Mark, always good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott.
Thanks for being here. So we are talking trackers on truckers, as I think it's been termed and coined out there. Explain the idea here that is being floated by CVSA. And it's not a new one.
Yeah, no, this is something I think dates all the way back to maybe 2010, 2012, something like that, that CVSA first petitioned FMCSA to do something on this. And it's basically unique electronic identifiers on commercial motor vehicles. And the idea behind it is that CVSA, from a short distance, would be able to track the truck and be able to tell who the motor carrier is, who the driver is, this sort of information, so that the idea is that they would focus on the high-risk carriers and the high-risk drivers, that sort of situation, and they think that would make their enforcement more efficient. Obviously, on the other end of that, we talk about major privacy concerns and also questioning whether that would actually improve safety by hyper-focusing on certain people as opposed to really trying to tackle everything as well. So there's definitely a lot of concerns there.
Yeah, and it's a very, I think, slippery slope is fair to say too. And obviously we talk about ELDs and the pushback there. This, we're talking something different being a tracker, and the amount of information that, law enforcement and others would have access to. That's a huge, huge, huge concern for a number of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think truck drivers already, when you talk about like companies want the self-facing driving cameras and all of those sort of things. I mean, nobody, no matter where you work or what your job is, I wouldn't want a camera on me at all times at my desk in the office. I, wouldn't want this idea of just kind of always being under some sort of surveillance. I mean, I think that's, part of the concern. But another thing, why I kind of wanted, brought up this story and wrote about it here recently is, we talk a lot. We got a highway bill coming up. And we talk about what truckers want to see in the next highway bill, what OOIDA wants to see in the next highway bill. And we talk about, truck parking funding. We talk about, getting overtime for truckers. We talk about, stopping speed limiters from ever going into effect. All of these variety of things, broker transparency. But I think what sometimes gets lost in the shuffle is that there are other groups out there that are also telling lawmakers what their priorities are for a highway bill. And the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance recently, released their priorities. And topping the list is this trackers on truckers, that they think this is going to, help enforcement and do all those things. So I think, it's really important, not only when we talk about this individual issue and concern, but just to understand that there are opposing forces out there that also have the ear of lawmakers. And that's why it's so important for truck drivers to not only advocate to their lawmakers about the things they want, like truck parking, but also play some defense with some of these things and explain why that would be a no-go. And going back a little bit history on this, like we mentioned, there have been several times that CVSA has petitioned the agency on this. The last time they did it under the Biden administration, there was about 2,000 comments. And one of the reasons it got kind of sidelined last time is frankly because so many truck drivers were the people delivering those comments, saying all of these issues and problems with it that we're talking about now.
Yeah. And that's my concern, too, is that if they're talking about slipping this into a highway bill, that's something that could happen relatively quickly as opposed to an actual rulemaking.
Exactly.
And I imagine there are lawmakers out there. I could see this being one of these issues that people hear it and they think, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah,
if it's going to improve safety.
And law enforcement say it's it's the best thing out there. It's the top of their list of priorities. So you could see that, and it's exactly right. Is a good point because they've tried to get this through the regulatory process several times. They've been denied, told they don't have enough information, the privacy concerns, all of those things. What they're trying to do now to get in the highway bill is sidestepping that. And what would happen if Congress is able to get this across the finish line and passed into law? FMCSA has no choice. They'd be mandated by Congress to start this regulation. And I will say just real quick on this one would be only on new commercial motor vehicles. But with that said, eventually that would be all of them.
Slippery slope for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, something worth monitoring. Obviously, you'll keep us up to date on landline.media, the website there with anything that may come up. But again, if you're talking with a lawmaker, you might just bring this up and put this in their ear because I'm sure they'll be hearing about it as well. Mark Schrimmer, we appreciate your time as always. We'll see you again soon.
All right, thank you.
That was Mark Schrimmer of Landline Magazine. Mark Rettig, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. Congratulations to Kenneth Becker of Montgomery, Texas. He's received the OOIDA Safe Driving Award for 33 years of safe, accident-free driving. That's the equivalent of a car driver going 248 years without causing a single accident. The OOIDA Safe Driving Award program is sponsored by Shell Rotella, and if you're interested in receiving the Safe Driving Award, you can find a link to more information on our website, landlinenow.com. You can write and post a review of the doctor who performed your DOT physical to be shared with other truckers, or look up other reviews of a doctor through the OOIDA website, ooida.com. Just go to the main menu at the upper left corner of the page, and under Resources, click on Certified Medical Examiner Review. Again, that's at the association's website, ooida.com. Next, we'll bring back the story of the day Saigon fell 50 years ago through the eyes of two truckers who were there, and I'll discuss the FMCSA's 9-point plan with Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
High heat and low lubricity can break your diesel fuel down fast. Summer driving means crowded roads, more stress, dust, and a bigger risk of costly engine damage. Howe's Diesel Defender protects from the inside out, cleaning, lubricating, and fighting injector wear. Visit howsproducts.com.
With rising costs affecting everyone, switching to a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper can help you avoid expensive repairs and downtime. Save money and keep your truck running smooth with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Landline Now, welcome back. In our lifetimes, we will all witness important turning points in history. Some are positive, like the moon landing or the fall of the Berlin Wall. Others are sad or tragic. Now, a former Navy crew involved in one of those moments wants to make history again. Landline Now host Mark Reddick has a report.
It was late April of 1975. Radio stations across the country were playing Philadelphia Freedom by Elton John.
So the stage is being set.
George Foreman fought for the first time after losing the heavyweight title to Muhammad Ali. And the Symbionese Liberation Army took kidnapped victim Patty Hearst with them to a bank robbery with the security camera footage exploding onto TV screens nationwide. At Tulane University in New Orleans, President Gerald Ford said this:
"Today, America can regain the sense of pride that existed before Vietnam. But it cannot be achieved by refighting a war that is finished as far as America is concerned."
However, the president was wrong. America had one last role to play. 7 days later, more than 9,000 miles and an ocean away, the long and terrible story of the Vietnam War truly reached its end. Saigon, South Vietnam's capital, was in its death throes as the North Vietnamese army slowly clawed its way into the final scrap of land under Southern control. As the sound of explosions and small arms fire burst through a thick soup of heat and humidity, those events brought 20 years of American involvement in the South to an end. And that triggered a long-planned effort by the U.S. military. Signaled by an April 29th radio broadcast of Bing Crosby's classic song, White Christmas, Operation Frequent Wind began. Planes, any kind of ship available, and helicopters loaded past capacity with refugees and U.S. Embassy staff began the rush to evacuate the slowly falling capital. As the choppers and ships made their way out into the South China Sea, a destroyer, the USS Kirk, waited ready to help. On board the Kirk that day was Bill Cutler, 65, of Mooresville, North Carolina, a longtime trucker and an OOIDA life member who served as a gunner. As events picked up steam on April 30th, Cutler witnessed one of the most enduring symbols of those sad events.
Every time a helicopter landed on the flight deck, we disembarked the personnel off, disarmed them, and threw the helo over the side. Each helicopter was loaded with 8 to 10, maybe 12 refugees coming straight from Saigon. So you multiply that times 13, and then one CH-47 Chinook loaded with people also.
The Kirk was to have a significant role in the events of that day, leaving Bill Cutler and others as witnesses to history. However, the pace of events ramped up, and the die was cast for the last free parts of South Vietnam much earlier. OOIDA senior member John Osborne was serving as a Navy medic at the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, charged with the care of non-military staff. Osborne had already served 2 tours, one as a medic with the Marine Combat Battalion, the second with the Brown Water Navy, the patrol boats and swift boats on the nation's rivers. However, working in an embassy was a long-time goal, so he accepted the Saigon posting. He mainly treated minor wounds and problems. Anyone truly sick, he says, was shipped out. If he thought the embassy duty was going to be a walk in the park, he was disappointed, and he remembers those events well.
It started out probably 3.5 days prior, hit and miss, and it just got more intense. And then when we realized that most of our embassy personnel and other embassies had bailed, and we had a lot of ships off the coast. I mean, a lot. I mean, we had stuff from frigates to multiple carriers. Probably the largest concentration I'd ever heard of U.S. ships out there.
Among those ships was the USS Kirk. Along with Cutler, on board that day was Hugh Doyle, now the historian for the USS Kirk Association. Doyle remembers well how the evacuation of April 29th and 30th started.
When the evacuation started, it was a helicopter evacuation. When it started, the Marine Corps helicopters that were cycling back and forth from sea into Saigon to pick up the official evacuees and bring them out, they were planning on taking out somewhere in the vicinity of, I guess, about 7,000 people that they were planning on. But what they weren't planning on was all the other helicopters that started swarming out.
The main evacuation on the final day was by U.S. military helicopters, the big Chinooks, designed to carry up to 50 people. They were taking off from every U.S. facility near Saigon, including the American Embassy. John Osborne said as the hours passed, the pace became more and more frantic at the U.S. compound. More Americans and staff left, and the people outside the embassy enclosure became more hostile. Meanwhile, those at the embassy could hear explosions in the distance as the North Vietnamese army inched closer and closer, although many of the blasts were Americans and South Vietnamese forces blowing up equipment, vehicles, and munitions to prevent them from falling into the North's hands. While that was underway, another unplanned evacuation was taking shape. Led by South Vietnamese, mainly officers in their Air Force, it involved smaller helicopters taking off from locations throughout those areas not yet controlled by the North Vietnamese Army.
Every guy that could get his hands on a helicopter, and there were stories of those helicopters landing in neighborhoods and picking up everybody in that neighborhood that wanted to leave. They hadn't planned it that way. It was just, he went to get his wife and his kids and said, "I got room, come on." And people just grabbed what they could and went because they had been told the stories of being retrained by the communists when the communists got there, and it just scared the Jesus out of people.
Hugh Doyle remembers those smaller choppers as well.
These were Vietnamese helicopters that we had given to the Vietnamese Army and the Air Force over the years. All of a sudden, these little Huey helicopters, the single-rotor helicopters, just started to swarm out.
As the last of the U.S. military Chinooks headed out to sea to rendezvous with waiting Navy vessels, the smaller choppers followed them. John Osborne saw an apocalyptic, chaotic scene unfold.
The sky was full of the smaller, Hueys and Bells and even some Hughes helicopters, which basically had, 5, 6, 7 people, and they were crammed full of people. I actually saw a couple helicopters that people were holding on to. They shouldn't even been there. For their dear life, they were holding on. I hope they made it. But we were over water, and they were still holding on. Don't know how they did it, but, and listening to, as we, deplaned, that's what the term for leaving the helicopter, it was just amazing. I've been hurt a time or two in the military, and I've been hurt in other things, but scared, thinking I wasn't going to make it home, and I volunteered for that duty.
Hugh Doyle said the motivation of the escaping Vietnamese was obvious, and everyone knew what was coming.
They knew that the end was there, so they just took a chance. They jumped in any helicopter they could find. Most of these helicopters were piloted by young Vietnamese Air Force and Army pilots, and they had their families aboard, their wives and children and their mothers and fathers, and they were just looking for some place to land. And they found us, as well as many other ships. We were just one of many small ships that were part of this evacuation, and it was an impromptu thing. It was not part of the planned evacuation.
John Osborne was on the second to the last U.S. military helicopter to leave South Vietnam. He says the well-known photos of smaller choppers on the embassy roof were not in fact the official U.S. military aircraft that were evacuating American staff. Those landed and took off from a parking lot where John boarded the chopper that evacuated him and others out to sea. Back at the embassy, a single Marine platoon remained behind to provide cover. It was assumed that they evacuated with everyone else, and it was hours before their rescue. Meanwhile, John's helicopters sped to the large U.S. fleet offshore. As he watched the surrounding skies, it became increasingly obvious that things were not going according to plan.
We're there and we're going and we're going and we're hearing this aircraft carrier is available. This one's now not available. I mean, and at the same time, you're hearing smaller helicopters are landing on ships that aren't designed to have more than one helicopter. So these guys are taking South Vietnamese military helicopters and having to toss them over the side so that they can get the next helicopter that may be running out of fuel before, as it lands. And that was, chronic. You could hear Mayday, Mayday, I'm out of fuel, on and on, all kinds of stuff on the radio. And they pretty much piped it through so we could hear it. And we were kind of wired.
Long after the final U.S. chopper left Saigon, the smaller helicopters continued to take off for the fleet. John says the last small chopper evacuating people from the embassy roof took place long after the last Americans left. From the deck of the Kirk, which was closer to shore than most of the other U.S. ships, Bill Cutler, Hugh Doyle, and their fellow crewmen watched the situation unfold.
We were watching these little helicopters fly over us, heading out further, much further out to sea. We were one of the closest in ships to the shore. The larger aircraft carriers and large amphibious ships were further out to sea, maybe 10 or 12 miles beyond where we were. These Vietnamese helicopters, the little Vietnamese Hueys, and a couple Chinooks too, were flying over top of us, just searching for the large decks to land on. We had a flight deck, but it was only a flight deck that was able to take one helicopter at a time. They were just swarming out. The Marine Corps and the Air Force helicopters that were part of the official evacuation, all these Vietnamese helicopters started following them. And they were just looking for some place to land. They had their families aboard. It was completely impromptu.
The captain and crew of the Kirk recognized that help was needed, and fast. So as with nearly all U.S. personnel that day, they rapidly took action.
We had a man on board. It was a first-class petty officer who spoke some rudimentary Vietnamese. So we brought him up into our combat information center, and we started broadcasting that we had an open deck. And we just broadcasted the number of our ship, 1087. We just said, land here, and he just kept repeating it in kind of pidgin Vietnamese, land here, land here. And finally, one of the Vietnamese pilots got the hint. He saw us, he heard him, and he came in and landed. And it was quite a thing. We had a young man stand down there. His name was McClellan. He was a young airman, and his job was to land helicopters. That was his job was to land our helicopter. The reason we had a flight deck is we had a helicopter of our own. So the first Vietnamese helicopter came in and successfully landed on board the ship. As soon as he landed, other helicopters saw that he was landing on our ship, so they all lined up. And we had about 4 or 5 helicopters all waiting to land on our flight deck. Problem was, it was a single flight deck, and could only take one helicopter at a time. So the next thing we did was the captain made a decision to take that helicopter once the people were safely off it, and just throw it over the side, which then cleared the deck for the next one to land.
At one point, one of those helicopter pilots, after offloading his passengers, miscalculated. His chopper went over the side prematurely with him inside it. Bill Cutler kicked off his shoes and dove into the water after the still-running chopper, saving the pilot's life. However, as the Kirk became ever more crowded, the too many helicopters problem was quickly replaced by a far more serious one, and the crew of the Kirk once again proved they were up to the task.
Mark will have more on this story coming up after a short break.
At Truck Stop, we built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on Truck Stop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Firestone's FD694 drive tire for long-haul and regional applications now delivers 126,000 more removal miles than the Yokohama TY517 MC2. Contact your Firestone commercial dealer to learn more.
Landline Now, welcome back. 44 years ago, the USS Kirk played a vital role as Saigon fell and the Vietnam War ended. Before the break, Mark Rettig was relaying the story of the massive helicopter evacuation. We continue now with that story.
The wave of helicopters flooding out of South Vietnam on April 30th, 1975, quickly created an entirely new problem for the crew of the USS Kirk: refugees. The destroyer was never designed to handle any significant number of civilians. Plus, the Vietnamese refugees left their homes with little to nothing, and what they did bring often went overboard with the helicopter after landing. OOIDA member Bill Cutler says that as the Kirk quickly filled, the crew made every effort to provide the care those refugees needed.
We became overcrowded very quickly. We had to put up tarps for the people sitting outside. It was extremely hot, so we had to get them in the shade and get their food ready and all that stuff, and make sure that they were comfortable and well cared for.
Meanwhile, the chopper carrying OOIDA senior member John Osborne finally landed, putting him on board one of the aircraft carriers further out. From that vantage, he watched as more and more helicopters arrived all the way into the night.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and literally to the point that they lit these ships up with every light possible, not to blind them, but to get them there. And then the Navy medevac, the rescues, air sea rescue and helicopters, man, they were out coming back, getting fuel and going back out because there were aircraft not making it. There were aircraft having mechanical problems, but aircraft running out of fuel, aircraft overloaded. Basically, it was one or two guys flying with Mr. Rogers' neighborhood in the back. That's the best way I can say it. I mean, from newborns to grandma, stuffed in that helicopter. And I mean, maybe they were supposed to take 12, and they may have had 25. They were literally maxed out, and they threw those aircraft away. I mean, when they landed, they got out of them, and that crew on that ship over the side, and the next one would land, and it was boom, boom. And did they get to bring their stuff? No. It's a lot of stuff. When they got out of the helicopter, you weren't allowed to go back and grab that bag you'd left over in the corner of the helicopter. It went over the side. What you had was your family, and you had your life, and it was time to go someplace that you'd never been before and start all over again. And they were scared, very scared.
In fact, John said in many cases, it went far beyond scared.
Because there was some incidences where we heard some gunshots, and it was somebody realizing that their whole world had just died. And he had just flown a helicopter out, got his family there, and then he didn't want to live. And that was really sad.
Meanwhile, the USS Kirk, which had taken on the occupants of more than a dozen of the smaller helicopters, 200-plus refugees, rendezvoused with another ship more capable of caring for them. Even though their part in the helicopter evacuation was finished, many of those aboard the U.S. Navy vessels quickly realized they had more work ahead of them. Kirk Association historian Hugh Doyle said that was especially true for the crew of the USS Kirk.
We were directed to head south overnight by ourselves, and we went down to Con Son Island, which was a small island off the coast, the southeast coast of Vietnam. And what we didn't realize at the time is that the Vietnamese Navy, the remnants of the Vietnamese Navy, there were dozens and dozens of ships directed the previous couple of days to go down to Con Son Island and rendezvous there. And our job was to gather remaining Vietnamese ships, Vietnamese Navy ships, and take them away from Vietnam to the Philippines. When we arrived there, we found that there was probably upwards of 50 ships. And when I say ships, some were destroyer size and very small ships. Some of them were really too small to even make it across the South China Sea. So what we did is we took a number of hours, and we ended up with a total of 32 ships that were considered seaworthy. And the ships that were not going to go, that were going to remain behind, they took all their refugees and put them on to the ones that were going to go. So what we ended up with was about 32. I think the number was 32 ships. And on those ships were 33,000 refugees. We then got this entire force underway to Subic Bay in the Philippines, and it was about a 1,000-mile transit across the South China Sea. And we had 6 American ships with us and 32 Vietnamese ships with all those refugees. And it took us about 7 days to finally get to the Philippines.
On the decks of those ships, refugees were packed like sardines, shoulder to shoulder. Some of the larger ships had 7,000 to 8,000 refugees aboard. Worries about disease spreading and the ability of the fleet to feed the mass of South Vietnamese refugees weighed heavy on the Kirk's captain and other commanders. John Osborne says the U.S. naval personnel taking in refugees did an incredible job, working long hours and doing anything needed to keep the situation under control. None, he said, seemed frightened, shaken, or affected, from the top officers down to the medical personnel.
No, they were like, this is my job. I've got to do this. Above and beyond professionalism, care. I mean, whether you were a corpsman, whether you were just a basic first aider, they were checking people out and passing people on. I mean, the triage started the moment you came out the side hatch of that helicopter. Somebody was checking you or grandma or that baby or whatever out, and they're looking for real sickness right away or real injuries right away or mental health. I mean, that was the other cool thing. Every chaplain that I saw was rocking and rolling. And when they could find a Buddhist priest that was in the group, that poor guy did not get a break because he was right there as the translator for his South Vietnamese people, trying to make sure that their head was on right. You know, I can say that everybody I met gave 110%. Nobody, not a single person, whined, bitched, nothing. I mean, it was, can you get back up there and help them? Can you do this? No problem.
Hugh Doyle says it was the same on board the Kirk, which is even more amazing when you consider much of the crew's relative lack of experience.
We had 275 men aboard. It was only men then. There were no females aboard the ship. But our average age was probably about 21 years old, which means all the old folks, like I was 30, the captain was 38 years old. The oldest chief petty officer we had on the ship, I think, was 42, and he was the ancient mariner. You know, so at age 42. So what that meant, you know, if you do the math on that, we had a whole lot of 18 and 19-year-old boys, really. And in fact, we had 3 17-year-old kids. They called them kiddie cruisers. They were aboard with their parents' permission. They had to, in order to enlist in the Navy under 18 years old, you had to get your mom or dad to actually sign a permission slip. So we had 3 of them aboard. But all of a sudden, we weren't planning to shoot anybody. We weren't planning to do anything other than to change diapers and feed babies and do all that. And these young men were just actually magnificent. They really were. Anything that was needed to be done, these guys were standing in line, volunteering to do. You know, rough, tough sailors, all of a sudden they're big brothers and uncles and to all these refugees. It was great.
At the Philippines, its mission accomplished, the Kirk sailed on to other duties. The refugees, for the most part, were resettled in the United States, and history moved forward as it always does. "44 years later, the story of the USS Kirk is still not over. OOIDA life member Bill Cutler, the former Kirk crew member, says the ship remained in the U.S. Navy until the early 1990s. That's when it became part of another nation's naval forces.
The beat goes on.
She is currently flying under the Taiwanese flag in the Taiwan Navy. And after we came back from Vietnam, which was 1976, we had received orders that she was going to be re-home ported in Yokosuka, Japan. I got orders off the ship at that time, myself and the other plank owners, to go elsewhere in the Navy. And she was sent over to Yokosuka, Japan until, I believe she was decommissioned in 1989 in Yokosuka, and put under a Lend-Lease program to the Taiwanese Navy. After the Lend-Lease program, they actually purchased the ship, so it's in their care entirely.
However, the crew members of the Kirk are extremely dedicated to the ship and its memory, and they aren't content to let the story of the USS Kirk end there. Bill Cutler and Hugh Doyle have been part of an effort to bring the Kirk back to the United States, make it into a museum, and help educate people on an important event in our recent history. They set their goal and have started their effort, even getting the USS Kirk Association registered as a nonprofit so they could take donations. Cutler says they've contacted the Taiwanese Navy, letting them know of the association's interest in the ship, and they've started the effort to get the funds necessary.
We are going to be doing a fundraising program to raise enough funds to reclaim the Kirk back to San Diego, her home port, where she originally belongs, to convert her to a floating museum and training center, an educational facility, to teach people what it was like to be in Vietnam and do the things we did over there for the refugees. It's taken us this long just to get the 501c3 organized and approved. So we now have the green light and we are starting to move forward to accomplish this mission. And it's going to be a Mount Everest-sized mission to get this done. So the fundraiser is just going to be a small portion of it. We're going to need a lot of media coverage. We're going to need a lot of other people getting on board, that influential people like senators and congressmen and whatnot. Our main goal is to get the ship back to San Diego so that our captain, Lord willing, he's still with us, and he is today, can stand on the bridge and sit in his chair one more time.
Bill Cutler said that the crew of the Kirk from that era remained dedicated to their captain, Paul H. Jacobs, and executive officer Richard McKenna, calling them, quote, two of the finest officers the Navy's ever produced. They remember how the two men led the crew in the rescue and in the task that followed, feeding all the refugees while still running a Navy vessel in potentially hostile waters. At one point, Cutler said they took on several tons of rice and accomplished it in 15 minutes flat. It's that commitment that Bill told us the crew members still have, thanks to that leadership.
It was an honor to serve under Captain Paul Jacobs and Commander McKenna. They trained us very well for the task at hand. They taught us not to give up, always move forward, and never quit until the job is done.
However, as far as the restoration of the Kirk, Bill Cutler will not see the job done. On January 2nd, along US 59 near Hungerford, Texas, Bill Cutler, who survived Vietnam, Navy service, and 30 years behind the wheel of a truck, died as the result of a crash with another truck, which was going the wrong way on a one-way highway. He was 65 years old. For Landline Now, I'm Mark Reddick.
The USS Kirk Association is accepting donations toward the effort to repatriate, restore, and display the vessel. You can learn more about the group, the ship, and the effort through the website kirk1087.org. Under the Save the Kirk link, you can read about the effort and give money toward it through the Donate button. Again, that's at kirk1087.org. A documentary about the Kirk and its role the day Saigon fell is also available online. We'll have those links on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the headline or photo in the red box. I'm Terry Scruton, and this is Landline Now.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. Late last week, the Secretary of Transportation announced an entire series of proposed actions to make the lives of truck drivers better. Here to go over what we know at this point is Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Colin, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited by this announcement.
I can imagine. Absolutely.
Yeah, very much so.
So this kind of breaks down into 9 individual points. And before we get into any details, I want to make sure we tell people all of these, the general points. Can you just go ahead and go over the 9 points?
Sure. The first is involving truck parking. They announced some grant funding that is going out the door, a lot of it for Florida, which is a location where we certainly need more parking. But they've also reinforced the fact that this is a national priority and communities should be addressing truck parking, which we certainly welcome. Second point is, and this one I think will get a lot of praise from drivers, is the withdrawal of the pending speed limiter mandate. The third item is the relaunch of a pilot program that analyzes what a 3-hour pause would do for drivers, basically to pause their clock to rest or because of traffic or whatnot. The fourth item is also related to hours of service, and it explores more flexibility in split sleeper berth options. The fifth item improves the driver resources page on FMCSA's website, so tools for drivers, makes it easier to access them. The sixth item is data queue reform, introducing more due process into the system, which is certainly welcome. The seventh item is modernization of the National Consumer Complaint Database, or NCCDB. The eighth item is a commitment to address and crack down on double brokering. I think that's going to take a little bit of time to figure out, but at least we're pleased the administration is taking double brokering seriously and wants to combat it. And then the final item is certainly welcome for our members who are driving older trucks, and that's a commitment from the administration that they will not extend the ELD requirements to trucks that have pre-2000 engines, which is great. Sorry, that was a very quick rundown of the 9
It absolutely was, but
items.
it's an amazing series of actions. I haven't seen anything in my 22 years doing this on this level of change from FMCSA and this level of change that's all positive to truckers.
Absolutely. And, this was the result of the executive order involving English language proficiency that the administration put out in late April. Included in that was a commitment within 60 days to provide some sort of regulatory framework to improve the working conditions for truckers. And now here they are, 60 days later, rolling out these 9 points, which we can't applaud enough. I mean, if you've seen the materials about this rollout, OOIDA has been praising the administration for all these steps because we really do believe they will help improve working conditions for our members, which is our primary goal. And we've had a lot to do with these priorities, with these 9 items. So I'm happy to chat about them in more detail. But we kind of did a roll call on these 9 items and thought, OOIDA's been actively pursuing 8 out of 9 of these. We've been leading the charge on several of these, which I'm sure a lot of listeners identified when I was going through the list. But I'm getting tongue-tied because I'm so excited about all the breakthroughs we've had because they don't come too often. I mean, a lot of our members express concern that things don't really happen in Washington. Things don't really change in Washington. And the announcement last week is clearly a departure from that. Things are happening, things are changing because the administration is listening to drivers and organizations who represent them like OOIDA.
Well, and I know that you don't like tooting your own horn here, Colin, or tooting the association's horn, and typically we don't overtly do that here. But the fact is, for the most part, all of this is essentially a result of what OOIDA has been doing for years, and I think the association's got to take some primary credit for this finally happening, especially with all the work they've done with the current administration.
That's true. And, the modest side of me that you're referring to, I think, looks at these and says, there's still work to be done. We still have missions to accomplish in all these. The administration can only do so much, but they've gone really far. And like I said, truck parking, speed limiters, hours of service flexibility, National Consumer Complaint Database, improved data queue, these are all things that our boss, Louie, has been telling folks on Capitol Hill through congressional testimony. I mean, don't forget, he was a witness at a Senate hearing earlier this year, a House hearing earlier this year, and he talked about all these items and said, here's the blueprint for Washington to start enacting changes that really benefit professional drivers. And the administration took that to heart, and they said, here's what we can do. Here's what our authority allows us to do on these issues. And it's moving every one of them in the right direction. We're just thrilled, and I think it shows that the administration really does care for truckers and wants to address trucker needs, but not compromising safety. A lot of these things are going to enhance safety, we believe, because, people for too long have been ignoring drivers' input on what will improve safety. And this administration is coming out and saying, actually, these drivers are the experts on safety. So let's take their word and move forward with things like providing more hours of service flexibility, because the rigidity is just causing too many safety problems. And speed limiters, we're going to crow a lot about the speed limiter mandate being withdrawn because we've been leading that charge, but we know that's not good for safety. And I think they're killing a lot of birds with 9 stones here, but they're really demonstrating to our members and to our organization that they're listening.
Well, and you mentioned Louis' testimony, and this goes back to something that I've heard before. Very often when he is on a panel of people testifying, he is the only one who's actually driven a truck for a living, and he did it for a lot of years. And I remember Todd Spencer saying years ago, he's on the Motor Carrier Safety Advisory Committee, and he often pointed out over the years how often he was the only person who had driven a truck for a living on a committee dedicated to safety on the part of people driving a truck for a living. There are a couple of things I do want to just clarify for folks listening. The NCCDB, National Consumer Complaint Database, explain very briefly what that is, because part of the problem is the name of the darn thing.
Yeah, and if listeners aren't familiar, we're not surprised, and that's part of the problem. The National Consumer Complaint Database, which is a stupid name we've been trying to change for years, and I think we might actually have an opportunity to do so, is basically a clearinghouse for truckers to submit reports or complaints about safety violations, about fraudulent activity. And in theory, the agency is supposed to follow through on those reports and take action against bad actors who are operating in the trucking industry. And for too long, that resource has been undermanned, not prioritized. And I think the fact that the administration is shining a light on NCCDB and taking some initial steps to improving it and to making it a reliable and trustworthy resource is going to be great for our members, because they feel like when they do submit claims, there's no follow-through, there's no action. So taking steps to enhance that system is something we've been talking about a long time, because it empowers our members to really identify the bad actors in trucking and have FMCSA follow through and hopefully remove them from the industry, or at least take steps to remedy some of the problems they've created.
We just have about a minute left, but I did want to ask about one other thing here. That's the 3-hour pause that is being looked at for people to just pause their 14-hour clock. When OOIDA first brought that up, a lot of truckers were concerned, saying that, well, shippers and receivers are just going to take advantage of that at the dock. But I think it's worth pointing out here that in pushing for this, Louis Pugh actually talked directly with FMCSA and told them, you have to watch out for that. That's going to be a problem.
Yeah, and behind the scenes, there was a lot of work done, a lot of communication with the Department of Transportation and FMCSA specifically about these 9 points. And Louis has really been hammering home that 3-hour flexibility has to be, the control for that has to be maintained by the driver. Otherwise, it will double down on a lot of the problems with hours of service. If drivers are capable of taking that pause when they feel tired or they're facing inclement weather or traffic backup, that improves safety. When motor carriers or brokers or shippers or whoever starts to try to take advantage of drivers with that 3-hour pause, that's when we start seeing more problems with safety. So bravo to Louis for continuing to hammer home the fact that the department and agency needs to make sure that that power remains with the driver. And frankly, the conversations we've had with them, they are committed to doing so. So this is the first step, but as they go towards implementation and studying hours of service, we're going to make sure that they put bumpers in place to protect the power of drivers to use that 3 hours.
Okay, well, Colin, we're out of time, but thank you very much for everything. Folks, that's our show. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad.
A son.
A husband.
Wife.
I'm a writer.
Photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
My kids.
Chrome. And I am a professional truck driver.
And together, we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us.
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.